Coming up today, the leaders of South Korea and China agree to strengthen communication, but differences remain over the upcoming deployment of a US missile defense system to South Korea. The UN Security Council is set to discuss North Korea's latest provocation. The regime launched 3 ballistic missiles as leaders from the G20 met in China. First, prosecutors summoned the elderly founder of Lotte Group to appear for questioning over the corruption allegations swirling around Korea's retail giant. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello to our viewers around the world. It's 6 a.m. on Tuesday, September 6th, here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Mark Broom. We are going to start with the summit between the leaders of South Korea and China on the sidelines of the G20 Summit. Presidents Park Geun-hye and Xi Jinping vowed to upgrade their already highly established relations. They also agreed to exchange views on the upcoming deployment of the missile defense system THAAD to South Korea, agreeing to continue communicating on the thorny diplomatic issue. Our Song Ji-sun starts us off.
There were steps forward, but not dramatic ones, as the two inched closer to an understanding. Park called for Beijing's cooperation, stressing that this is the last chance to curb North Korea's nuclear and missile threats, and that if it weren't for those threats, there would be no reason for THAAD. Chinese President Xi Jinping vowed to implement the UN sanctions on Pyongyang and reaffirmed Beijing's stance on a nuclear-free Korean peninsula. Park said that being able to deter North Korea's reckless nuclear provocations will contribute to peace and stability, which is in the two countries' common interest.
The two countries expressed concern and recognized the urgency and severity of North Korea's continued provocations. As for THAAD, the two sides exchanged their basic stances and will follow up with further communication.
President Xi, however, expressed opposition to the U.S. missile defense system being deployed to South Korea. According to China's state-run Xinhua news agency, President Xi said, quote, "Mishandling the issue is not conducive to strategic stability in the region and could intensify disputes." The two sides were on the same page in terms of developing bilateral relations, with next year marking 25 years of diplomatic ties. Park said relations should be upgraded from recognizing their differences to trying to narrowing that gap.
지금 우리 모두가 직면한 다양한 안보, 경제적 도전에 효율적으로 대응해 나가기 위해서는 새로운 시각과 접근법이 필요한 때라고 생각합니다.
We must take an active role to encourage global and regional peace, and we must overcome difficulties and challenges for China-Korea relations to develop on the right path.
Going forward, Seoul and Beijing agreed to reinforce strategic communication on multiple channels while involving Washington in a trilateral dialogue. After having agreed to expand strategic communication on North Korean issue with Russia and now with China, President Park will continue her call at summits with the U.S. and with Japan at our next stop of Laos for the ASEAN Summit. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News, Hangzhou.
Now, the G20 summit closed on Monday with world leaders agreeing to take coordinated action to boost the slowing global economy. However, many would say the most attention-grabbing moments happened on the sidelines of the summit. Kwon Jang-ho reports.
The two-day meeting of leaders from 20 of the world's leading economies closed on Monday with the adoption of a joint communiqué dubbed the Hangzhou Consensus. The agreement stressed the strengthening of policy coordination between the nations to improve the flagging world economy.
We covered issues on stressing policy coordination and breaking a new path of growth, more effective and efficient global economy and financial governance, robust international trade and investment, inclusive and interconnected development.
Chinese President Xi Jinping warned world leaders on Sunday against rising protectionist tendencies, saying it was putting the world economy at risk. South Korea's President Park Geun-hye reiterated the importance of increasing free trade in Monday's meetings, stressing instances of protectionism in the past had damaged economies. But on the sidelines of the summit, this year's G20 forum was one where political divisions and struggles were strongly evident. A high-profile meeting between US President Barack Obama and Russian President Vladimir Putin ended up with no agreement on the ways to de-escalate the war in Syria, with more discussions set to come in the near future. Obama also met with Xi before the start of the G20 summit, both ratifying the landmark climate change agreement. But the goodwill was seemingly soured by a minor diplomatic incident at Hangzhou airport, where Obama was the only leader without a red carpet reception due to a mechanical failure of the staircase. Commentators said it was a deliberate snub by China, although Obama was quick to brush off the incident. Brexit was also a tense subject, with several nations, including the US and Japan, warning Britain it could take time to negotiate trade deals and face withdrawing overseas businesses. The first G20 meeting in China might have successfully closed, but global issues and concerns remain. Kwon Jang-ho, Arirang News.
Chinese President Xi Jinping and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe have agreed to accelerate talks on their territorial dispute in the East China Sea. During their first one-on-one talks since April of last year, Abe said any dispute has to be solved peacefully under international law, not through power or intimidation. In response, President Xi urged Japan to exercise caution in its words and deeds. He added that both countries should try to bring their relations back on the track of normal development as soon as possible. The two sides later agreed to speed up talks on implementing an air and sea hotline between their defense ministries to prevent further accidental clashes in the East China Sea. China and Japan have faced off numerous times over the ownership of a group of uninhabited islands called the Senkakus in Japan and Diaoyu in China. Now, while the G20 summit was in full swing, North Korea lobbed 3 ballistic missiles into the East Sea. The provocation was a show of defiance and frustration, but it also demonstrated advancements in the regime's missile technology. Arconic Kim with the details.
In defiance of the international community's calls to halt its provocations, North Korea fired 3 ballistic missiles into the East Sea at 12:14 p.m. on Monday, South Korea time, from Hwangju County, south of Pyongyang.
North Korea's ballistic missiles launched today are believed to be medium-range Rodong missiles. They flew about 1,000 kilometers until they hit waters within Japan's air defense identification zone without a no-sail warning.
The North usually alerts ships to stay off its east coast ahead of a missile firing. South Korean military authorities have slammed the provocation, calling the launch a violation of the UN Security Council resolution passed in March. Seoul has been watching closely for possible provocations from Pyongyang, as September 9th, this Friday, marks the 68th anniversary of North Korea's founding. The North has a track record of provocations around that important regime anniversary. 2 years ago, it test-fired 2 short-range ballistic missiles. The timing of Monday's missile provocation is important to note, as it coincides with the G20 Summit in China, where the leaders of South Korea, the US, China, and Russia have been discussing the upcoming deployment of the THAAD missile defense system to South Korea. Military authorities believe the North's missile launch on Monday is part of an armed protest to keep military tensions on the peninsula high by showing off its nuclear and missile capabilities to commemorate the regime's founding and to mark the G20 summit. Pyongyang's latest provocation comes less than 2 weeks after it successfully launched a ballistic missile from a submarine. Military and intelligence authorities are keeping a close eye on the advancements of the North's ballistic missile capabilities as its range becomes longer and its aim more precise. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Now, as you would expect, the missile launches drew immediate condemnation from South Korea as well as the wider international community. For more on Seoul's response and experts' views on what may be behind the latest provocation out of Pyongyang, Kwon So-ah reports.
describing it as a clear violation of UN Security Council resolutions and a threat to not only the Korean peninsula, but also to neighboring countries and the international community. South Korea's foreign ministry condemned North Korea's latest ballistic missile test on Monday.
North Korea has nothing to gain through such provocations. South Korea and the international community's zero-tolerance policy and the will for sanctions and pressure will only grow stronger.
Echoing South Korea's denouncement, Japan also lodged a strong protest against Pyongyang's missile test. And Prime Minister Shinzo Abe reportedly told U.S. President Barack Obama that the act is unforgivable on the sidelines of the G20 Summit. While Seoul's foreign ministry stressed the launches occurred while global leaders gathered at that G20 summit, that doesn't necessarily mean Pyongyang timed Monday's missile test on that occasion.
I think we need to get away from thinking that everything North Korea does on the ballistic and nuclear front is a reaction to some kind of current news event. I know some people are suggesting that it might be a message to the G20, for example. I think we need to keep in mind that North Korea has a long-term armament plan which calls for certain things to be tested at certain times.
The professor also noted that as tests are happening more and more often, the window for opportunities to stop Pyongyang's weapons development, including its nuclear program, might be closing, which in other words implies the regime could be seeing more global measures aimed at stopping its ambitions.
North Korea's missile launches are becoming more frequent. In this situation, we can't help but apply international sanctions.
More pressure is expected on the international front. According to an official, the UN Security Council will most likely issue a press statement against North Korea's missile test in the near future. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Yes, and as a follow-up to that report, the UN Security Council will hold an emergency meeting on Tuesday in New York to discuss North Korea's latest ballistic missile launches. UN officials say South Korea, the United States and Japan jointly requested the meeting. North Korea's firing of 3 Rodong medium-range missiles off its east coast came just 12 days after its launch of a submarine-launched ballistic missile. The Security Council unanimously adopted a press statement condemning Pyongyang 2 days after that SLBM launch. Now, in other news, the ongoing probe into alleged corruption at Korean retail giant Lotte Group has intensified as prosecutors have summoned the conglomerate's elderly founder to appear for questioning over the scandal. Hwang Ho-jun reports.
He's the founder of Korea's 5th largest conglomerate. He's been at the center of a bitter family feud that cost him his position as CEO, sacked by his own son. Now, he's been charged with aggravated tax evasion of about $550 million and breach of trust. Shin Kyuk-ho, the 94-year-old patriarch of Lotte Group, was issued a subpoena by the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office on Monday afternoon to appear before prosecutors on Wednesday. Whether he will actually answer the summons remains a question. Just last week, the South Korean court appointed a law firm as the Lotte founder's legal guardian, due to what it called his diminished mental capacity owing to his old age and poor health. Lotte Group's head of external affairs, So Jin-se, was also subpoenaed and appeared for questioning Monday morning. Prosecutors said they've collected much circumstantial evidence since last month that has led them to suspect So of committing aggravated breach of trust. So was expected to be questioned for alleged involvement in irregularities in the process of raising new capital for a Lotte affiliate between 2010 and 2015. Prosecutors will also probe So on suspicions he created slush funds for the founding family. Entering the prosecutor's office, So denied the allegations raised against him.
There are no such slush funds. I intend to answer all questions earnestly.
The prosecution has been looking into the group since June after launching full-fledged raids on its headquarters and affiliates. The investigation quickly escalated after Lee In-won, a Lotte executive considered a key player in embezzlement at the group, was found dead late last month in an apparent suicide. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
Now, Korea's Thanksgiving holiday, known as Chuseok locally, starts in just over 1 week from now, and Koreans are busy buying gifts and food for their family and friends. This holiday won't be affected, but soon making purchases for co-workers or business partners will require everyone to pay extra special attention to the price of gifts due to a new anti-graft law. Shin Se-min has the details.
More details of the newly passed anti-graft law have been released. According to the Anti-Corruption and Civil Rights Commission, the brand new Kim Young-lan law, or the Act of Prohibiting Illicit Solicitation and Bribery, will affect 40,919 organizations. The figure includes central administrative bodies, local schools, and provisional state-run institutions. Of that, 96.8%, or over 39,000 institutions, are schools and media outlets. Under the new legislation, those working in stipulated sectors will be prohibited from receiving meals pricier than $27, gifts worth more than $44, or receive congratulatory or condolence money for a wedding or funeral that goes over $89. Those who violate the law will be faced with a fine worth over $27,000 or prison time of up to 3 years. The law, named after the person who had first proposed the act, was passed by the parliament last year, which was approved by the Constitutional Court in July, will go into effect on September 28th. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Well, that's all we have for now on this Tuesday morning here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broom. Thank you as always for tuning in. We will be back throughout the day with more newscasts. Our next bulletin coming up at 10 a.m. Korea time. So until then, goodbye.